Dreamer chapter 32. What lurks beneath. Until he opened his eyes and he looked round, he was lying on dirt and leaves, and when he looked again he was dismayed to find that he was in some kind of dark, filthy cave. It didn't look good. He stood up and looked outside, and all that he could see were green fern trees and rugged fields. It looked like paradise. The screech of an eagle in the distance changed all that. He looked again, and although he wasn't an expert on birds, he was sure it looked too large to be an eagle. He peered closer, and he was amazed to see that it was a pterodactyl. He could see its veins bulging and throbbing through its giant wings and its massive pointy beak. It was terrifying. He inched back into the cave, and Jack wasn't sure if they were vegetarians, but he wasn't going to wait to find out. He didn't know how he'd got here, and he couldn't see a way out, but it was his reality. At least it's safe in here, he thought, relieved, and then he heard a hissing sound. Oh no, at first it sounded like somebody was frying bacon, and he looked around and he could see nothing, and then he looked up. There it was, curled round the branch of a tree. It was oily black and with a bright red tongue flickering out as if ready to strike. A horrible snake. Jack inched away quietly, stepping on the soft leaves. He was careful not to make the slightest sound. He had no choice but to leave the cave. Wasn't sure which dangers awaited him outside, but he had no choice. He wasn't ready to be the snake's breakfast. There was danger everywhere. Slowly he edged down the hill, and he kept his eye on the pterodactyl. But luckily for Jack, it had flown off into the distance, but he could still hear its horrible cries. He made his way through the fir trees, and his heart jumped with every noise and falling branch. He expected it to be pounced on, gobbled up at any minute. He was a nervous wreck. It felt like he had a target on his back. He picked up a stick and he used it to beat back the ferns and the tangle of weeds. Thankfully, the ground was hard and not slippy. Jack heard the sound of running water in the distance, and he decided to investigate. And he came upon a fast-flowing stream. He bent down to cup the water in his hands, and he splashed it on his face. He wasn't sure if it was drinkable, but he was so thirsty that he didn't care. The water was cold but refreshing, and he was tempted to go for a swim, but he wasn't sure what lurked beneath. He had a good idea that it wasn't going to be friendly. He jumped when he heard more shrieks and cries in the distance. He felt so vulnerable and alone. He had a flask in his bag, and he filled it with water from the stream. Something large and dark moved through the water, and he took his hand out quickly. Jack was startled by a rustling sound above him, and he was amazed to see small monkey-like creatures hanging from the branches and scratching their furry orange tummies and grinning manically. They really need a good floss and polish, Jack thought, amused, and he threw them a banana, and they scrambled to catch it and shrieked like babies. It was so funny that he could have watched them all day, but he knew that he had to keep going. He cut through the fern trees, and pretty soon he was starting to sweat. It was heavy going. He sat on a large brown stone and drank a large gulp of water, and as he did, a large shadow covered him and the surrounding trees with an ominous dark. It wasn't a cloud which was causing the light disturbance. It was an iguanodon, or maybe stegosaurus. He wasn't sure. But either way, it was bad news. It was munching on a plant and only 10 yards away from where he was standing. Jack gulped and edged back into the foliage. It ripped the leaves off the trees as it stood on its hind legs, which was when Jack realized it was an iguanodon. Jack was amazed by its size and power. It turned its massive head and gave him a long, curious look, and then it went on munching away. Jack was transfixed. It was amazing being so close, but his amazement soon turned to terror when an even larger shadow fell, and the forest went dark. It was a T-Rex, and it was big, very big, and vicious looking, and totally terrifying. Jack dropped his water bottle and he quivered with fright as the T-Rex jumped on the poor iguanodon and started biting chunks out of him and having him for lunch. I'm next, thought Jack, and he gulped. The T-Rex turned its wrinkly, massive head and cast its evil black eyes towards him. Jack wanted to run and he tried to run, but he was frozen with fear and his legs wobbled like jelly, literally. The T-Rex teeth were as large as tombstones and just as dirty, and they were as sharp and deadly as 100 razors. I'm done for, he whispered, to no one in particular, as its huge clawed foot whipped round in lightning speed and squashed Jack like a bug on a windscreen. Luckily, he felt no pain, and everything went as black as the T-Rex soulless, dead eyes.